how open source is changing the entire landscape of the industry, how AI is interacting with the things, and how the future is being built. We have the co-founder of Grafana Labs, Anthony Woods, with us for this episode. Welcome to the episode, Anthony.
Thank you. It's great to be here and have a conversation with you today.
How exactly it was, why it was started, how it was started, why do I pay for Grafana?
One of the big challenges was just how difficult it was to build dashboards, right? The problems weren't with Grafana, the problems were with the databases themselves. Really what you care about is the impact to the user, what's important to them. From day one, we set out to just make the best open source project we could, and we'd worry about how to make money later.
What do you think is the difference between monitoring and observability? Why open source is important?
The increasing complexity in the software. Open source has gone from that, it's risky to have, to now it's risky not to have. Where if you're not adopting open source, you're going to get out innovated by your competition.
I should have logs for it. I should have metrics for it. Where does it fail?
You don't need it until you need it.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 3 of TechKeys by Mercari. I must say today's episode is going to be very, very special for me. It's personally very close to me. Being working in the platform engineering space for so many years, I've seen observability going from monitoring to observability. Now, I must say that if you have seen any production incident or you have gone through multiple metrics, making sense of what these values are, whether your CPU is going high, whether your memory is behaving, or your systems are responding, or you have made dashboards, you must have definitely heard of or used Grafana. And for today, I can't ask for more. We have the co-founder of Grafana Labs, Anthony Woods, with us for this episode. Welcome to the episode, Anthony.
Thank you. It's great to be here and have a conversation with you today.
Thanks a lot. Well, before we dive deep into all the systems, how observability actually came from monitoring to observability, how the open source is changing the entire landscape of the industry, how AI is interacting with the things, and how the future is being built, I'll probably switch down a couple of years back, I think 11 years back when Grafana was founded. So if you can share some bits, how exactly it was, why it was started, how it was started.
Yeah, it's a great story. I mean, it was a long time ago now. I think, we certainly started, the Grafana Labs company back in 2014, but the Grafana project itself, started before that.
Nice.
Very end of 2013 when Torkel started, working on a better dashboarding tool for, helping engineers understand the telemetry data they were collecting.
When you say better dashboarding tool, which dashboarding tool were you using earlier?
Yeah, so he, working in Stockholm, he had a team that had a lot of data they were collecting in Graphite, which was one of the early open source time series databases. But even though they had this data, nobody was using it. And so, Torkel had this hypothesis that it was because the tools that existed at the time to visualize the data just weren't inspiring.
It was too slow. It was too, I've been using Ganglia plus Graphite in very early stages of my career. And it took a while to load, and especially if you increase the timelines, it would screw up and have no data. So yes.
Yeah, and also one of the big challenges was just how difficult it was to build dashboards, right? It was a lot of writing complicated JSON and storing it to visualize it. So, he thought that there was a better way, and if he could build a tool that one looked beautiful and also was very intuitive and easy to use, it would encourage teams to leverage the data that they were collecting and help them be more data driven in their decisions. And it turns out he was onto something. And so it's very interesting. He started that project. We saw this amazing growth. But then separate to that, Raj, our CEO, and myself, we'd worked together for a number of years. We started off in the managed hosting industry. We did a lot of operational support. We dealt with monitoring tools daily and the pain and the troubles that we had. And then I had a little stint where I went and worked at Visa, the credit card company, and discovered how the lack of capabilities that enterprise software had, right? The big gap that there was in the market. And I was very fortunate that my boss at the time gave me the freedom to start replacing these very expensive enterprise tools with things that I could build myself. Either just writing it from scratch or putting together open source. And so I was inspired, from that experience to do a startup.
How was that motivated? It was a side project that was just started and you guys decided to make it open source, or you always plan to make it a big company like it is today?
Yeah, I mean, it's typical of startups, right? What you set out to do is rarely what you end up doing.
Yeah.
So Raj and I, we wanted to do a startup, something in the observability space, something in monitoring space. We
Okay.
wanted something SaaS. And we saw this great open source project and we're like, hey, this is, open source. We can just use this as the, foundation of our product and we can build on top of that. And the more we used Grafana, the more excited we got about it. At the same time, Torkel was, he'd left his job. He was working full time on Grafana and he wanted to build something out of it, but, didn't know where to go. And, we just reached out to him, right? Raj called him up and said, hey, we'd love to meet you. Come out to New York, work as a consultant to help us with Grafana. So he flew out. We spent the week together. We didn't do a lot of work. We
Partied a lot?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time talking. We got along so well. Torkel talked about his vision, what he wanted to do. We saw a great opportunity. We had a great set of complementary skills that it just really made sense for us to bring Torkel on as a co-founder and just pivot for the company to be about Grafana, right? And so that's what we did. And from day one, we set out to just make the best open source project we could, and we'd worry about how to make money later, right?
Money follows. If the product is good, customers comes
Exactly,
in
yeah.
and they want to pay for it. That's definitely a great story. Thanks for sharing that. Well, I've always wondered whenever I'm using this, right? LGTM stack.
Yeah.
So looks great to me,
Yeah.
but also resembling some of the great products by Grafana. How did you guys manage to do that?
Yeah, again, it's another story, where we didn't set out to build databases, but like all good engineers, when we saw an opportunity, we built a new database. But we just had this engagement with our community and our users of Grafana where they were running into problems. And, the problems weren't with Grafana. The problems were with the databases themselves. We were seeing this big, shift within the industry around the volumes of data that were being collected was suddenly, accelerating, the big shift to microservices. It's a great way to, improve velocity of product development, but also brings a lot more complexity to your products, right, and to your software where you need more telemetry to kind of understand it. And so the existing database at the time just kind of couldn't keep up. And so we had this problem internally, and we built our own database. It was actually the first big project that I actually contributed to was a project called Metric Tank, right, which was a horizontally scalable graphite time series database. And we had customers that had problems. We said, oh, well, we've got one. Do you want to send us your data and we'll manage it for you? And they said, great. And so suddenly we were in the business of hosted based metrics and
Managed TSDBs like with Prometheus and stuff, and it's literally a nightmare when the wall gets corrupted and then you have to recover that entire set of data and then you have that missing metrics out on your graphs.
Yeah.
I can totally imagine what kind of complexity, the amount of data that you are handling.
Yeah.
What kind of complexity
it's a good problem to have, right? It's always interesting. There's always new things we learn. I think one of the great positions that we're in is that we can learn the lessons once and then be able to, solve that problem for all of our users, long term. So everyone's not having to learn the same mistakes over and over again. So that gives us a lot of, velocity and a lot of scale that we can go and do. We started in the graphite ecosystem, but one of the interesting things we had with Grafana is we had some anonymous phone home data, so we could kind of understand where the trends were going, what different data sources people were using, and we saw this massive explosion of Prometheus adoption. It was just growing.
I think it's along with Kubernetes when Prometheus also started.
Definitely, and it was just a new way of approaching observability. It was a new tool. It worked really well. It scaled really well, and so we knew early on that was where the industry was going. So we pivoted, moved away from graphite and moved into the Prometheus kind of ecosystem, which led us to a little company called Causal, which is we acquired, which is where Tom Wilkie, who's now CTO, came from. And so he had a great vision around, he was one of the maintainers on the Prometheus project. He built the horizontal scalable kind of Prometheus backend, which was Cortex at the time.
Okay, nice.
But he had a great vision around extending that beyond just metrics and bringing in logs and traces as well. And so this is where the LGTM kind of came from. And it was actually really interesting because when we started, working on the project, the logging project originally was named Tempo.
Okay.
And then, we were at an offsite together and Tom said, oh, but in the future, I'm going to build tracing and I'm going to call it Loki. And then someone in the room's like, why would you do that? Why would you have the logging one start with a T and the tracing one with an L? Why don't we flip them? And then someone said, and then we've got these letters and it makes the acronym LGTM. And we're like, yes, let's do that.
That's superb. And trust me, in the industry, especially with talking with a lot of engineers, LGTM just strikes off your head, right? And
Yeah.
it's I don't know whether it's an accident, but it came off to a very great marketing
Yeah.
stint as well.
Yeah, we love it. It works really well. We have our sales team who's co-opted it. They now think it means let's get the money. But we like the looks good to me because it resonates well with developers, and it's really
Yeah.
also it's around that telemetry, right? We want to look at the telemetry, understand the systems, and see whether they're healthy or not. Yeah.
That's superb. So, in terms of that, right? When do you actually think, as from your perspective, monitoring got transitioned into observability, and at as per you, what do you think is the difference between monitoring and observability?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think one of the big drivers I think has been one of them is the shift to microservices. So the increasing complexity in the software, where it's no longer good enough just to know whether it's up,
Yeah.
right? You actually need to have the telemetry data, not just to tell you when things are broken, but really to be able to provide you insights and understanding about how your system is working, so that you can troubleshoot it and fix it.
Which request broke at which part of the
Yeah,
system?
yeah, and especially with this complexity, right? Like you've got all these microservices, different things talking to each other. Often you're unsure of like, is this thing broken because that's a symptom, or is it the cause, right? And there's definitely, when you've got multiple teams, there's always finger pointing. It's like, oh, it's not my service, it must be theirs. So it's important to have that telemetry just to understand exactly how the system is
Yeah.
working. Yeah.
And one thing about metrics is also that at times, because of the average out of data and the aggregation, the actual context of one outlier mistake or request that's failing, that does not get caught in the system.
Yeah, I mean, so we're big believers that there's value in all the telemetry, right? We talk about the three pillars of observability, so your metrics, logs, and traces, and then we're very excited about continuous profiling being
Yeah.
that next pillar. But we think there's value in all of them, right? So metrics give you that high level overview. Of what's happening, just at a quick view, you can see where there's, trends and changes in your environment. And then you need, often more detailed. So logs are easy. We've had them for, generations. And then we see the distributed tracing comes in, which really helps with this, how does the request flow through all of these microservices that gives you a lot of insights.
Well, reading about all the LGTM stacks and logs, traces, metrics, and stuff, right? One interesting thing that caught my eyes a couple of months back was the observability survey that Grafana held. If you can pitch what that was, why Grafana held that,
Yeah.
and give a
Definitely,
background.
yeah. We think it's really important. I mean, we're being an open source company, we believe in communities, right? And community, it goes both ways, right? We give a lot of value, but we also get a lot of value from the community and understanding. And so we want to extend that. So this was our third observability survey, where we polled, I think it was a little over 1,200, somewhere between 1,200 and 1,300, practitioners and leaders, across the board in different spaces, just to get their understanding about, the trends that we're seeing within the observability space. Where are they seeing challenges? Where are they seeing problems? What does their tool stack look like? What's working well? Just so that we have a very good kind of foundation and understanding. It's important for us, as part of the community, but it's also a huge amount of value, to others to be able to look at that data and understand, where's the industry going, where are the trends, are they ahead, are they behind, are there things they should be, looking into that they haven't started yet?
While I was going through the survey results that you had, and great job in displaying the results also as a Grafana dashboard.
Yeah, and it's a public
That's
dashboard, right?
it's a public
on
dashboard, and that's
play.grafana, yeah.
pretty great, right? You can just go ahead, filter down the zones, go what interests you and stuff like that, and get it. Um, Coming back to that, right? One of the results that caught my eye is that a lot of trend is changing. That an exec buy-in is now, or the execs are also interested in getting observability systems for their organizations. Earlier, it was mainly at the engineer levels, or maybe at the tech leads level, or mats at directors. But CXOs coming into the picture now. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. That's definitely, the experience that we're seeing, engaging with our customers, in the industry. I think one of the big reasons for that is we talk internally around like this crossing the chasm, right? Of moving from early adopters of this technology more into the mainstream. And so I think the early adopters, they're your practitioners that they love this, they love this technology. They're going to go out looking for what's new and shiny out in the industry and try and bring it into their organizations. And then we have other organizations that, have a different level of resources available to invest in this kind of technology, and so they're kind of out in the fringes waiting, right, to see what sticks and what works, and so they've seen the success that these early adopters have had in adopting new observability practices and the value that they're getting out of it. And so now they're realizing they want that value, but those organizations are very different in how they adopt technology, right? They are more top down, right? So it's more your C-level come in and they come in with the initiative and say, this is what we're going to go and do now, and then the engineering teams go and adopt it. And I think that's the big difference, right? So we've got those really tech enthusiasts, right, who are just going to go and they don't need to wait for someone to ask them to do something, right? They're going to go and see what's out there, what's interesting, how can they push the envelope of what's possible. So they've adopted these practices. We've then seen the mainstream, observed it, they've seen what's happened, they've seen the success, and now they want it, but they're waiting for someone to tell them to do it. Yeah.
Got it. So it's more of a persona kind of thing. Like, for example, early stage people who can experiment and fail and learn from it are the early adopters that goes and any new tech, let's experiment about it, whether it makes sense or not.
Yeah.
But the other section of persona that you're referring to is people who want to wait and watch because the risk factor is too huge for them.
Exactly. Yeah. It comes down to risk mitigation. Yeah.
That makes more sense now.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
One interesting thing, again, whenever we're buying anything, right, we are spending money on top of it. These things usually comes in that how much I have to pay for it and whether it's worth paying for the software or not. Why can't I run it on my system, right? Why can't it be just a file of logs and I doing a grep on top of it? Why do I pay for Grafana and or any other system for that matter?
Yeah, and I think it's really important, right? We've certainly seen trends in the industry recently, right, where there's a big gap between cost and value, right? And so I think that's definitely top of mind, right? That's certainly a lot of the things that came out of our observability survey is people are worried about cost and how do they get value, right, without the costs exploding. But I think for us, it's very interesting. I mean, we have obviously open source, right? It's a great option, right? We're big believers in it. We want to make our open source as good as it can be, and there's a huge amount of value in that, right? And the cost is very low, certainly not zero, right? Because you have to have your engineering resources to go and focus on it. But we think it's for us, we're in the business of delivering value, right? And so when we talk to our customers, cost is a thing, but really what we want to focus on is value, right? Are you getting value out of your observability strategy, right? Is it helping? And that's really the most important thing. And I think we're seeing this trend certainly in the industry with this change in the way we build software and this move into microservices where tools that you might have been using in the past don't make sense in this new model, right? The cost profile of them is very different. They're not designed for these kind of use cases, and suddenly the value is not there anymore. So we're seeing more and more organizations who are looking to change what tools they're going to use because they want to address these challenges, and that's where we come in, right? And we've done a lot of work to help kind of bring the value and the cost numbers back to where they make sense. And we do a lot of interesting things around, we have a concept of adaptive telemetry, right? Where we believe that if we're storing the data for you, it's because it's of value to you, right? And so we give users the tools and the capability to analyze the data that they're ingesting, analyze the data that they're querying, and kind of work out what is the actual working set that's really important, just to help you manage, right, the cost, right? Give you that lever to control it.
With that, right? So this is one thing that I've also observed in my experience is at times observability is something that comes in when something is wrong, right? But you have to think about it while you are making your application or product. So this is one major gap that I feel in the thinking aspect of it. How do you think that is going on? Because at day one, right, I think that I'm just spending out money for it, But when an incident happened, that's what, oh shit, I should have logs for it. I should
Yeah.
have metrics for it.
Yeah.
Where does it fail?
You don't need it until you need it.
You
Right?
don't need it
Yeah.
until you need it. Yeah.
And I think this is definitely part of like observability maturity, right? So when we think about observability, it is a journey, right? Every organization is on that journey. They're just at a different stage along the path. And certainly we see when you're early in that observability journey, you don't know what data you're going to need. There was certainly messaging, 5-10 years ago, right, which was like measure all the things, right, because maybe you'll need it, right, and so a lot of people have adopted that, and now they have the consequence of they've got this overwhelming sea of data, and one, it costs them a lot of money, and two, when things go wrong, they don't even know where to start looking. So there definitely is some practices we're seeing where people need to be thoughtful about what is the important data set that you need to collect. We're big believers around, the approach of SLOs, where you'd be thoughtful about, what is this service, here for, right? What is the expectation from its users of what it should be doing, and how do I measure that? How do I measure whether it's delivering, what I've set out to do? Often for microservices, that's things around, request latency and, error rates, right? And so that approach of like, hey, they're the things that I care about that I need to know as to whether or not my service is healthy or not. And then I can start with that and then start building layers of additional data on top of that as I discover that I need them along the way. Otherwise, you can just start with measuring all the things, and then you've got to go through and start then filtering it out over time. Both approaches work. Depends
That's
on
an
where you are.
interesting point. So you brought in 2 points. It's not only about the cost, it's also about the noise that you have.
Yeah.
So if you have too much data, it's like finding a needle in the haystack, that something has gone wrong.
Yeah.
So that's a great point. I think that one of our viewers would be interested at. Another thing that you just brought in is, how do you actually measure? How do you think and decide from, rather than going from bottom to top, that I'll measure my CPU, memory, and XYZ? You measure it from SLO and then go down towards it. If you can elaborate more on top of it.
Yeah, so I think that's really important, right? The CPU, versus what the service is delivering is a great way to kind of compare these. Historically, we would go and measure what's my CPU utilization, and I'll trigger alert to say if I'm at 99% utilization, then something's wrong. The reality is that doesn't mean there's anything
Exactly.
wrong, right? Ideally, you'd want to be at 100% CPU utilization 100% of the time, because it means that you're getting what you paid for that resource. Really, what you care about is the impact to the user. Right. And so when you think about, observability, we like to encourage that thought process of like, what is the user's perspective? What's important to them, right? Because if the user's not being impacted, do you really need to page your on-call engineer at 3 o'clock in the morning? Not really,
Doesn't make sense.
And it doesn't really make sense. So I think that's what's really important, is understanding, what is the I guess the business value of the products, and it does require a little bit of a change, right? Where engineers, they need to be more thoughtful about how they're impacting the business and what it is that their role within the business. Not there just to churn out code, right? They're there to deliver value to their users, right? And what is that value, and how do they measure that? Is going to be specific to them, and that's something they should be understanding as a team. To make sure that not only are they building the right thing, but also they're able to measure whether they're doing that successfully or not.
Yeah, I think this is another example of this, is that how many number of pods you have. If 5 pods are down, whether you should alert or not, it does not matter, as long as all my requests are being served at.
Yeah.
I don't care about how many pods are running.
Yeah, and we certainly see this trend, right? With like chaos engineering, right?
Yeah.
Like we'll deliberately go and break things, right? And that's healthy. It's okay for things to be broken, and then you build more resilient systems, and they self-heal and they auto-repair, and that's a good place to be in, right? You don't need to, wake people up if the system is just failing and fixing itself, and not impacting customers. Yeah.
That's an interesting point. So in that terms, right, I want to go deeper into it. Is, how do you think that chaos engineering and observability both tie in each other? Because the same point, there could be possible that a chaos engineering is happening at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then your on-call engineer wakes up and says that nothing is there.
Yeah.
So if this happens too much, it's quite possible that for a valid alert, the on-call engineer won't even wake up saying it's the usual trend.
Yeah.
How do you have that balance?
So I think this is the challenge. I think the observability survey kind of highlighted around
Okay.
alert fatigue, right? Where people are just getting too many alerts, and so they just feel, it's that thing again. It's not that important. It'll fix itself, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably true most of the time, except for when it's not. And then
Okay.
suddenly you've got a big outage and no one's working on it. So I think that is challenging. And I think, for me, I think the solution to that is the SLO approach, where
Okay.
you only page people if it's actually actionable, right? If there's actually something that you want your engineers to go and look at because users are being impacted, that's when you page them. If it's just failures, increase in things falling over or pods restarting, if it's not impacting anybody, it isn't important. You can probably look at the data when you get into work the next day. You can have a look at your dashboards and see, okay, that's something we can go and investigate, but I didn't have to get woken up for it. The chaos engineering is interesting, where you introduce those failures in a more controlled environment. We all deal with chaos engineering. It's called users. They will try and break the system in unexpected ways. But if we can do that in a more controlled environment, where one, time-based, right? We know when it's going to happen. But also, then having the resources to go and look at it. And this is where the telemetry comes in, right? If you're going to go and break something, you want to make sure that you've got the data that you need to understand what went wrong and where it failed, so that you can go and fix it. Because otherwise, like, what's the point, right? Like, it then gets very difficult, and you're just breaking it for fun.
That's true. So anything that's not actionable, any alert that's not actionable is actually a noise.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I've seen that multiple times in my career, across multiple organizations, that they have channels that just keeps on popping messages on top of it. Something is wrong recovered, and no one gives a damn about it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Any new insights that, with the new changes and stuff that Grafana is working on, or that overall in the industry that you're seeing is changing to cater to this alert fatigue even more and more? Apart from chaos engineering is one of the.
SLOs is the big one.
Okay.
I think the other one is just maturity in your incident response processes.
Okay.
So this is another thing that came out of the observability survey, and it's actually something specific more in APAC, right, where we see
Okay.
a much higher percentage of people who see a lack of well-defined incident response processes as being, a big hindrance to adopting, to improving their observability. And so one of the things that I think, where this is important is, when things go wrong, you want to actually fix them, right? This is the whole kind of SRE model, right? Where, it's not just about stemming the bleeding and saying, I restarted the service, it's good to go now. Because it's probably going to fail again and you'll have to restart it. You actually want to spend the time to go and understand what was the actual root cause, and then go and fix that problem, where it actually exists, right? Rather than just constantly putting Band-Aids on things, right? Because you do want to put the Band-Aid on as quickly as possible, right? Because you do want to make sure that customer impact
Mitigation
is
versus resolution.
Exactly. But you still want to do the resolution and also the learnings, right? So when you have an incident, you want to have a good process, that makes sure that, one, your team's able to understand what they should do, right? What does the process look like? Go and declare an incident. You want to have your incident commander. You want to have an investigator. You want to have a log of the discussions and the insights that you gathered along the way. But most importantly, you want to write that post-incident review summary at the end that summarizes what you learnt and what you need to do to prevent this from happening again. And then you want that to be shared with your team, and you want it to be actionable, right? And that's really that learning step is really important to building that culture of building more reliable software, right? You have to, we have to learn from our mistakes. That's how we learn as engineers specifically. Lots of mistakes, but they're healthy, right? So we just don't want to be making the same mistake over and over again.
That's true. To that point, right? I've seen multiple blogs out there. There's a 5 why theory in terms of incident responses. How do you do a retrospective on top of it, right? One thing from engineering perspective I've also seen at multiple engineers, especially at the junior level, is if they're not able to identify that 5 whys, people just, and it's a template, you have to fill something out of it, right? People just fill, okay, I restarted this, it at this time this happened, that happened. How do you think, from observability standpoint, how can we enter it and see that autofill some of the details maybe? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of ways to go about doing this. Building that maturity, right? Like every organization is different, every technology stack is different, and so you have to kind of build those run books internally around how you troubleshoot within your own environment. So I think that's important is having those run books. And it's hard for engineers to write things down and document things, but it is really beneficial, especially when you're a growing startup. That's most important because you've got lots of new people coming on board, and you want to make sure that they've got a good understanding of how to go and approach problems in a certain way. But you also have to make sure that they're not too specific, right? Because ideally, you're not seeing the same problem happen over and over again. It's going to be a different problem because hopefully you fixed it last time it happened. But so you want to have good guidance on understanding the system, right? This is how to visualize it. And so we see obviously, dashboards are a great way of doing this, right? Building that high level overview of what's important for this application, what are its dependencies, just so that you can at a high level go and see where things are working and where they are not, and see, am I being impacted by a fault or am I the cause of a fault, right? It's a simple thing, right, to articulate, but it can be challenging in a complicated microservice-based architecture of knowing, are you the cause or a symptom? So having the data where you can kind of correlate and kind of understand and build those connections between your data becomes really important.
I think on that level, right? So one thing that I've also faced at a lot of times is my service is working well and good, my dashboards are fine, but one of the dependent service is down. Now that service is managed by some other team. They don't have the same way of dashboarding, or they have different dashboards or no dashboards at all, depending on the maturity of that product. Uh, how does toolings and other things are coming and solving this kind of picture, if any, if you can highlight that?
Yeah, so we definitely see this challenge. Again, another thing from the observability survey, right, where we see there's a lot of what we call technology debt, right? Which is you've got a whole bunch of different tools, different teams using it that you need to get on top of, and really we see that the solution for that is really these unified observability platforms, right? A place where you can kind of bring all of your data together in one place. The pipe dream, you'll have a vendor who'll come and say, hey, I can solve this problem of you having too many tools. Just give me all of your data. And then suddenly, you've just got one more tool, right? Because it's really hard to replace existing technology, whether it's for observability or any other use case.
The migration cost is always higher than...
Yeah, and there's not motivation. If you've got some legacy application that's not being, actively developed, no one's going to go and retool that to move to a different observability vendor. It's not a priority. So you're still going to have this data, but it's still probably a service that is a dependency for a lot of parts of your business. So, certainly Grafana, that's always been our approach, is to do things differently and say, just accept that is going to be true. And so not try and force people to go and move, off all of their tools onto something else. We'll just accept that you're going to have them. So how do we help you get more value out of them? Right? So how do we help you bring that data into a more modern observability solution where you can, combine that with, newer technology that you're deploying for your new applications and still have that single pane view of what's happening and be able to kind of correlate and understand all of that data. That's what we call our big tent philosophy, right? Where we want to focus on kind of integration and interoperability and less about trying to capture all of the data because we just know that's a very challenging uphill battle.
Yeah, I think one of the keys that we use is seeing is solving. Unless you see something, you cannot solve it.
Yep.
So that's kind of adding that value, because there's a legacy system, we are not doing anything about it, but it's still a dependency.
Yep.
So that's great. We have been talking a lot about open source during the entire conversation till now, right? Grafana also started as an open source product. So what's your take into why open source is important in terms of observability as an ecosystem, or even platform engineering for that matter, or any other space?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. So from a more high level, right, from just why open source is good, I think, we've certainly seen this trend in the industry where open source is where innovation happens.
Okay.
And so, we see things like Kubernetes, right? Even Docker, right? All these kind of things where open source is there now at the, kind of tip of the spear, pushing the technology forward, and that's where these new capabilities are happening. And we're seeing the need for this. Historically, open source was the bad word, especially in enterprise. It was all risky and scary. Where now things are completely changed, right? Where if you're not adopting open source, it means you're falling behind and you're going to get out innovated by your competition, and that's a big risk to your business. So now suddenly open source has gone from that it's risky to have to now it's risky not to have. So I think that's really important, right? A really important aspect is that's where innovation is happening, and we want to drive that. There's great minds that are passionate about what they're doing and they want to move things forward. On the observability specifically, we're seeing this great adoption of open standards and vendor agnostic tooling, right? Which I think is really important. People are going through this pain right now where they've got these legacy kind of monitoring tools, and they're like, it's not working. The cost profile the way it works, it doesn't work with with how we build our software now. But the migration cost is very expensive because they're having to retool. We're very excited around OpenTelemetry as an ecosystem. This vendor agnostic kind of open standards approach where instrumenting your applications, it's a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
You should only have to do it once, right? And you should have the freedom to be able to then go and decide which vendor you're going to give that data to, and you should be able to have flexibility to change that in future without having to go and re-instrument everything. So again, I think this is really exciting. I think this aligns very well with what we do at Grafana Labs, where our big tent kind of ecosystem and focusing on giving users flexibility. And we've seen huge adoption, right? So the survey kind of highlighted this. I think it's about 73% of organizations are kind of looking at OpenTelemetry or using it. And open standards, as well as that, is the Prometheus ecosystem as well, right? We see that obviously still being heavily used, and we see a lot of organizations that are using both. And that's great. I think there's room for everybody. We're working on both projects. We have maintainers on both and working to try to align them a little bit better. But just this whole value proposition around open standards, not being locked into a specific vendor is really important, right? It comes, especially when you're making a big strategic long-term decision about where you want your observability, to go and what your strategy is. It makes a lot of sense to come up with a strategy where you've got choice and flexibility to make changes over time. I think it's good for the industry. It means that the vendors like ourselves means we have to work harder to build better products because it makes it easier for end users to migrate off.
My next question is coming. That
but that's good.
Being a vendor yourself, right?
Yeah.
This might also scare you because if today I don't like Grafana, I'll switch to some other vendor as well.
Yeah.
Being with OpenTelemetry.
Doesn't scare us at all. We love it. It just means that we have to work harder. But as a vendor, right, like we're in a unique position where our biggest competitor is our open source, right? So we're already used to this model of having to compete and build, and we still want to build the best open source, right? Because the worst thing that could happen to us is that there's a better open source option, right? Like if we're running up against ourselves in a commercial deal, if we lose to ourselves, it's not truly a loss. It's just a delay, right? It just means that we'll come back at another time. Maybe there is the volume's growing where it makes sense to move to one of our products, or perhaps we've built that key feature that's really important to you that kind of is the tipping point to that where there's value, right, in going and using that. And so it's a great position to be in.
And that also makes the entry easier to switch from an open source version to an enterprise version because the users are used to what they see.
Yeah,
and
it's definitely a deliberate business strategy, right? Is that we want to encourage people, we want to make it easy for them to adopt our technology and see the value of it themselves, without having to engage a sales team, right? Like you can just go and be successful. You can see the value of it. You can help your teams understand what they're doing, and then as that scales across your organization, they'll probably get to a point where you'll realize, it's not actually beneficial for the business for us to run this ourselves. Engineering talent is
the manageability overhead when that comes in.
So one is the operational overhead, right? As it scales, it gets complicated. We are the experts at running it. We can run it at scale. But also just, effective utilization of your internal resources, right? Engineering talent is expensive. Do you really want them building something that's not core to your business, or do you want them going and working on things that are core to your business, right? Building your products, for example.
Build versus buy philosophy that
exactly.
You want to spend your people managing a TSDB or going ahead and building a logic on this one.
Yeah.
That completely makes sense. I just want to get deeper. Open source has always excited me personally as well, being part of multiple such tools. What do you think? What more can come in the open source industry? What Grafana is uh, kind of getting into? Obviously, no disclaimer informations, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the great thing about open source, right? Like, part of our culture is really about transparency, right? Like
yeah.
most of what we do is out in the open, right? We can talk about the things that we're doing. It's fine. So the big things we're working on right now is, big effort into continuous profiling.
Okay.
We're actually working a lot with the OpenTelemetry community to bring continuous profiling as part of the OTel spec. So it's a long process, but we're working on that. We're also so there's a lot that we're doing in OpenTelemetry in general. So a lot on the SDKs. We're actually just announced at our GrafanaCon conference a month or so ago. We're donating our Baylor project
Oh,
into
that's
OpenTelemetry.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, just because Baylor is our eBPF auto instrumentation tool. We've been working on that for a number of years. We've seen a lot of value and a lot of success, and we think it's now is the time to shift it across to OpenTelemetry just to broaden the user base, right, of who can get involved into the project and keep it moving forward. We're still going to continue investing in it just as we have before, but now we think by being part of the OpenTelemetry kind of project, we'll be able to get more people to come in and contribute it and keep moving it forward. Because we do think that again it brings a lot of value. Beyond that, we're always looking at new ways to build new open source technology and engage with our open source users. The observability space we'll see. I don't think there's anything major. I think the big area we're looking at is more how do we make Grafana and make our tool stack easy to use in this new kind of AI agentic kind of way. So there's a lot of work in our MCP server, right, and a lot of work just in our core technology stack of like making sure we have versioned APIs and schemas for things so that tools can interact with our applications, and it's not just always through the UI. I think these things are all very important for us for ensuring that there's a healthy kind of open source ecosystem. And then beyond that, for Grafana, it's really interesting. Observability is our kind of focus for our products, but observability isn't the only thing that Grafana is and our technology stack is good for. We see a lot of it used in BI use cases, and this growing, it is kind of observability because we're seeing the definition expand, right? You want to observe your infrastructure and your applications, but you also want to observe your developer productivity, and you want to observe your business processes and just your overall business health. And there's so much value you get about bringing all of that data together and combining it to give you that clearer insight and the better context about what's happening in your environment. So there's a lot we're doing in open source around that as well.
That will be very interesting, because one thing that, at least based on my discussions with a lot of engineers and the leaders in the industry, is that there has always been one confusion: where do we use observability systems and where analytics comes into picture, right? Because at the end of the day, everything is analytics. You are analyzing your telemetry data, but where is that line that comes in? And with this, I think it's kind of shifting, is what you're reflecting
Definitely, yeah. That those lines are definitely blurring for sure. Because there's value in both, right? You want to have that, business, intelligence data. It's useful to provide it to your engineering teams, right? To give them insights as to, the value they're bringing the business, right? Like, I just rolled out a new change, right? Did it lead to more revenue or did it lead to a decrease? That's kind of useful to know from an engineering team to know if they're doing the right thing. And so we are seeing this blurring of these lines, and also the tool stacks as well, right? Of where you kind of connect this data and bring it across. And so we think there's a lot of power in that. And so we want to kind of encourage that and build tools. I mean, as a company, we run our business through Grafana, right? Like all of our data is there. We have good insights into the health of our business processes and our different teams and how things are working. And simple things, like feeding down like cost data right down to our engineering teams, right? One of the things that we make our engineering teams care about is their unit costs, right? Like how much does it cost us to deliver these products? And we give them the visibility to see that so that they can self-manage that themselves and understand, not only are they building lots of new features, but also, they're maintaining the margin that we have on our product so that we can still be a successful business over time. So having all this data is definitely useful, and there's a lot of work to be done. We've done a lot of work over the years with Grafana just to make sure that it will work for a lot of these different use cases, right? So a lot of the different design decisions we've made of how we represent data, right? Not everything is temporal data. Not everything is needs to be a graph. There's a lot of table data. There's a lot of different ways of visualizing information.
With that information, right? One thing that I'm just trying to imagine in my head is a lot of data complexity will increase because at this time we have a concept of cardinality, blast, and metrics, right?
Yeah.
Where you are not allowed to add IDs on top of it or have some spontaneous URLs going on in the metric system because of the cardinality blast, and the systems are not able to handle it. But with analytics coming in, those are essential information
Yeah.
because you want to understand the user behavior. Could be possible that it's only a subset of users who are behaving in a manner they are right now. So how do we tackle to that
Yeah.
in terms of observability?
That's a really great choice. And I think this comes down to the choice of what is the right telemetry signal that you want to capture to represent those bits of information, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about metrics. Metrics are good for that high level overview. You do not want to put, user IDs in as a metric label, right? Because your cardinality value will explode. Assuming you're a great company, you've got lots of users, right? But putting your user ID in logs makes a lot of sense, right? Having a user ID in your distributed traces makes a lot of sense. And so it's really about being thoughtful about where you're capturing this data. And this is why we see the need for these different telemetry signals because each of them has different benefits and costs associated with them. And so picking the right tool for the job is really important. But you can capture and you should be capturing this data because it's not just one of the interesting things we see with some customers, as they kind of mature on their observability journey is where, they want, they've got their 99% reliability and they're really happy with it, but they want to go a step further where they want not just 99% availability aggregate across their users. They want every user to have
99% of
99%, which is really important because you could achieve your 99%, but it just means that 0.1%. That could just be one user who's having an absolute terrible time, right? And that can be important, right? Maybe that's your largest customer, right?
Potentially.
And so you'd want to go in and be able to understand that. And so you can't do that with metrics, right? Because the cardinality is too high, but you can definitely do that with distributed traces and other data sets that you have.
That's a nice perspective. So from what I can gather to that is how do we add more and more metadata information to the spans that we push in and get that system? That will be definitely a great thing to watch out for in as long as we can merge the entire stuff.
I mean, it's definitely a balancing act, right? It comes down to this cost and value thing, right?
True.
You don't want to add too much data because it gets too expensive, right? So you've got to find that balance, and that's going to be nuanced and it's going to be specific to each, developer team, essentially. So giving them control. There's a lot of good guidance, right? So the OpenTelemetry SDKs kind of help with this. One thing I love about OpenTelemetry is the consistent naming conventions, right? The semantic conventions, right? Where there is a group of metadata that is agreed upon that is important that everyone should be having, and that should be collected across all of your applications, and that is very useful. And then there might be something that's specific to your product or your team that you may want to layer on top of that. Yeah.
That definitely is a great advantage. The OTL collector and building the pipelines on top of the OTL collector has always been, like, personally for me, has always been a great addition in the overall system because now you can control things at the agent layer and not troubling all the 500 services. That whether you have added your own service or environment or cluster name or XYZ things your system or not. That's great. Just a couple of minutes back, and briefly you mentioned about profiling raising off to be a very great signal in conjunction with metrics, traces, and logs.
Yep.
If you can share what is profiling, why do people are started caring about it, and how does it actually bring value to the system?
Yeah, this is a great topic. So profiling is something, obviously, as software engineers, we've done for a very long time. Right? It's typically something you would do, in our local environment, or perhaps we might go and grab a profile from a running application in production just to understand kind of resource usage, whether it's CPU or memory or something else. And so this idea of continuous profiling is that you just continually, on a regular interval, you capture these profiles, right? And so a profile is typically, you'll go and create a snapshot of what the process is doing. So you might say over this second period, I'm going to grab 10,000 little snapshots of what function it was in and what resources it was using at the time. And then you can build up this model. And so with the continuous profiling, you'll do that every 15 seconds, every minute, or whatever it is that you need. And then you can store all those profiles. And that's one of the things that we do is we have a product called Pyroscope, our open source project, where you can aggregate and kind of store all those profiles and then be able to visualize them, right? So you can go and look and say, hey, what was my performance over this time range? And so it'll be the aggregate. So I'll say, well, you're looking at a 1 hour time range, and these are the sum of all of the, for CPU, for example, this is the sum of all the CPU usage in all of these functions that we detected over that 1 hour period. So you can see where your applications are spending time. So this becomes really useful when you've got problems that are around resource usage, right? You might have a slow memory leak, for example, right, which is going to cause a reliability problem. You can go and use it. Typically, we see the continuous profiling is more value for performance-based things, right, where you've got reliability, but you're worried about that tail latency, right, or you're worried about the number of CPU cores that you're having to use because it's getting expensive. We've seen customers who've rolled out profiling and found low-hanging fruit and performance and saved 10,000 CPU cores, right?
That's huge.
It's huge, right? The product sells itself, right? Like it pays for itself pretty quickly. And so we find it really useful. But again, it's on that kind of, your observability journey, right? Like if you're still rolling out your metrics, logs, and traces, you're probably not ready for profiles yet. Or maybe you are, depending on what's important to your business. If performance is important, it is going to be the tool for you. But it's definitely, it's another layer, another group of data that can help you understand your system, really get down to kind of like the code level, where is time being spent? Where is there room that I can go and optimize?
Got it. So from what I'm getting a sense is that if my system is using millicores of CPU, it does not make sense to profile that application. But if I'm using cores and cores of instances for doing a job, and I'm usually getting that CPU alerts at the night, profiling does make sense because now I can catch which process or which function is probably causing that to go off the system.
Definitely. I mean, like, observability is really about having the data to understand, right? To understand your systems. And so, if there's a gap in your understanding of how it's working, profiling can be the telemetry signal that helps you get that understanding. Yeah.
Okay. So from that meaning, right? So for example, we had metrics, we have CPU metrics, and then you had a corresponding HPA that came off to take action on top of the metrics. If something is going wrong, it scales up or scales down the instances to optimize the cost that you're spending. Do you see something similar coming out for profiling as well, where with continuous profiling, there's a system that gets that data and does some meaningful things on top of it to automatically do it or manage it? Or a potential, maybe?
Yes. I mean, I think we're getting into the realm of like generative AI, right? Right, where it's really kind of looking at that data and understanding what it means and being able to make recommendations, right? I certainly wouldn't open up my systems to letting the AI make the changes quite yet. Maybe they could submit a pull request, maybe. But that's the kind of space that we're getting into now. And again, I think one of the challenges is that you have to have a good understanding of what is the expectation of this service, right? What should it be doing, right? So having baselines of what normal looks like, and then saying, okay, if it's deviated, then I want to go and look into it. I think is really important. I think that's a big part of observability is knowing what normal looks like, right? So that you can detect when things are different and things are not going the way you expect them. And so you have to define that, and that's going to be unique to every specific application.
It's a great point that everyone talks about optimization, but it's equally important to know what are you performing today. Because I've seen people complaining, my pipelines are taking too long of the time, but teams missing the data that what's an average performance of a build pipeline. So even if you're doing something, you're just hoping that would have improved it, but you don't know whether it actually did or not.
That's important. I mean, even when you think about applications, right? Like you don't want to go down the path of over-optimizing, right? Unnecessarily optimizing. I've heard a term, I think it was aggressively optimizing, where that's engineering resources you're putting into it, but is there value in doing that, right? Does it matter if your web page takes 100 milliseconds to load versus 120? Depends on your business, right? maybe not, right? So you have to have that understanding. For a lot of organizations, that's not going to be true, right? That extra 20 milliseconds is not going to have an impact. And so putting in, a week's worth of engineering effort to go and shave off 20 milliseconds is probably not good value for the business.
I think I've seen teams going fussing about 4 nines of availability or
Yeah.
3 nines of availability, but it's a great point to have error budgets into the system. That what happens if it goes down for X minutes in a month? Whether I because achieving double nine availability is fine, but for triple nine, the cost of that goes very up.
Yep.
So
I think it's like 1,000 times more expensive to get to those additional nines, right?
yeah.
And I think this is really important, right? I've talked a lot about SLOs today, but I think this is a great value that we see out of them is that not only do they help you, troubleshoot, know when there's something wrong, but it also gives you that signal to your team to know where they should be investing their development effort. Should they be putting more effort into, technical debt and reliability, or are things reliable enough that they can go and invest more time into innovation and building new features and new capabilities that delivers value to their users? And so having those signals are important because again, you don't want your team, building the most reliable piece of software because the way you build reliable software is you stop changing it. Right? As soon as you stop changing it, it gets significantly more reliable. But that's not good for your users, right? Like they expect things to evolve and new features to come out over time. And so you've got to find that right balance for your business. And that's where your kind of SLOs come in of like, what is the expectation, right? Some services are going to have a very high expectation of reliability because they are very critical to the business and to the users. Other services it's going to be much lower because if they're down for 20 minutes a day, it's okay, right? We'd much rather focus on building a capability, building new features that's going to be more important and more impactful for the business.
I think this kind of relates and comes down to the survey results of execs coming into the system and caring because now it is also giving a visibility on what bet the business should make as a whole, what staffing requirement should happen and stuff like that. So it's observability is different from monitoring because it's not only knowing that how much CPU or memory you are using, but it's also enabling users to deliver high impactful decisions and make high impactful decisions.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously that's how Grafana started, right? Like we love to say don't get in the way of the data, right? Let the data define your destiny, which I think is really important. I think that's the thing that we're seeing with observability, right? It's not just about uptime, right? It is about having confidence to know where you can go and prioritize. And one of the big things that we see this observability practice coming about, that businesses care about, it's really around developer productivity, right? And how does it help developer productivity? Well, one, it helps them build more reliable software, right? So they're not spending as much time putting out fires. But two, it also gives that clear signal to the teams of that they can go and focus on delivering value. They can move faster, right? Like we like this concept of move fast and break things, right? Yes, we want to move fast. We try not to break things, and if we do, we want to make sure we can fix them really quickly, right? The observability data gives us the ability to do that because we've got the data to understand what's gone wrong, so that we can see quickly when it's broken, and two, we can fix it really quickly because we know what the root cause is. So this is where observability, for the business side of things, why they care about it is because it helps them deliver products faster.
That's awesome. So one more thing that excited me while I was reading the survey results is having different team structures. There were some engineers that were doing it themselves. There were some that were having a dedicated observability team. What's your take to it? Do you think it's an important decision for an organization to have its own observability team set up? And when do organizations take that decision? At what scale? At what level? If you can get some.
Yeah, there's definitely, and we see this again, it comes down to kind of like the maturity that you're on your observability strategy and the maturity of your engineering org and size and scale come into it. So when you're a very small organization, by small, I mean, 100 or so less engineers, you do want to give a lot of autonomy to your engineers to go and do what's right for them. You don't want to be too prescriptive. And so you see, each team does their own kind of thing, and that's okay because by not being too overburdened on specific, everyone has to follow this way. It lets them go and discover what's right and learn, as they're kind of building, right? And you'll then discover over time.
You build it, you own it.
Yeah, but you'll discover over time what works in this organization, right?
Okay.
Some teams will be successful with what they've chosen, others will not be, and then they'll say, okay, we'll go and adopt that one. And you'll get to this kind of state where you start seeing the majority will start moving towards one. But then as you scale as an engineering org, you start running into problems where you've got engineers that are moving between different teams or need to understand, the different data sets, the different products and the different microservices. And so, if you've got one team doing it one way and another doing another, it becomes very difficult to understand holistically how the two of them are operating. And so then as you get to this scale, you come to this need and this realization that no, we need to have kind of consistency. And so you might pick one tool, and then that's when you start moving into this kind of centralized observability strategy where you're like, well, if we want to have a set of consistent practices that everybody's following, we need to have kind of that center of excellence, right? Someone, a group of people who can come together and say, this is what we've decided is the right way for the
standardization.
Standardization, yeah. And again, it's challenging in engineering org. It's very difficult to go and tell engineers what to do. You have to really set them up and make it something that they want to do, right? You got to make it appealing, make it valuable, help them understand the value of it, and get them to want to adopt, the best practices. And we see this as the trend. That's usually how we see the central observability teams start. Is they're there, they build out, the best practice, the golden path, but they have to make it so that people want to go and adopt it. They can't go and force them to do it. Certainly not, in the early days. As you get everyone moving to it and adoption, you get to a certain kind of, velocity and scale where it's like, okay, now it's, just because this is where the momentum is, this is going to have to be the standard. And those that haven't adopted it yet, you're just going to have to do it. And then that gives you that, ability to kind of keep moving it forward and focus on, what's valuable to the business, right?
I think with that point, right, a lot of our viewers will agree to it, is that there's a small gap between how much we can standardize and the value of customizations. Because I've seen that in the past, especially that you say that, okay, this is the log standards, but someone will say, no, I need this, or this is a standard dashboard, but someone like, no, why this data is not there on the dashboard? Why that data is not there in the dashboard? And how do you feel manage these kinds of things? What do you think is the right way to approach that part?
Yep.
And how do you approach it within Grafana?
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting. So, we believe that it's very difficult to build a solution that works perfectly for everybody.
True.
Right? It's just not possible, right? Everyone's got so many different needs, right? Different edge cases, but we think, there's value in building the solution that gets you 95% of the way. One of the things I love, certainly the differentiation we have at Grafana Labs is that, we've built this, incredibly capable, observability, open source observability stack, right?
Yeah.
So when we think about our open source, it really is a collection of tools that then you can build things on top of, right? Typically an observability solution. That's what we've done, right, for our Grafana Cloud, right? We've built this observability solution on top of this foundation layer of tools. And so we've built a lot of opinionated solutions that are out of the box. They solve for the 95% use case. But the great thing that we have is we're still built on this core technology stack. So if you want to go and build that bespoke little thing for that other 5%, you can still do that, right? So you can build it in a way where it still fits in overall. And I think that's where the value of open source is. And we talk about, our kind of model of SaaS and open source and like open SaaS, right? Where you get the benefits of both, right? You get the SaaS, it's just out of the box and it just works and someone's running it for me. But I also, my power users get the ability to go and build those kind of bespoke things that, are leveraging the capabilities of open source so that it can go and solve, problems that are specific just for, for their business case, right? Which I think is really powerful kind of position to be in.
I really like the term open SaaS. That's a great term, to be honest. Okay, this is an interesting perspective that I agree that we cannot solve it for everyone. Yeah. So if our standardization is solving for majority of the people, that should be fine and a good enough incentive to go ahead and do it anyways. That's super awesome. And well, we are sitting in 2025 and any discussion in 2025 without AI is, I don't think so it's complete enough. So What's your take on AI as a technology first, and then we'll talk about AI in observability and other things. What do you
Yeah.
think about it?
So I think obviously it's changing the world, right? I think
Okay.
it's going to be very impactful. I think it's going to be similar, if not more impactful than the internet came about, right? But at the same time, I think there's a big hype, right? And there will be some utility that will come out of that. On the observability space, I'm really excited of where things are going. If you'd asked me, maybe 10 months ago, I would have been a skeptic and be like, well, actually, I don't actually see a lot of utility. But we've actually had some really great innovations happening, inside our organization with some product capabilities that we've had where, we've really seen some really impactful and useful capabilities coming out of AI. So we announced our kind of Grafana Assistant at GrafanaCon, a month or so ago that's in private preview. And this just blew us away with, how well it worked, right? So the whole model, it's built in as an agentic model, kind of building tightly integrated into our Grafana cloud environment where it has understanding, it's context aware, it knows what dashboard you're looking at, it knows what our technology stack looks like. It's a chatbot, right? You can ask it, domain specific information, like typical things like, what's the best practices for monitoring Kafka or something, and it will give you that insight. And then you can do things like, oh, great, can you now build a dashboard, based on this? And it can go and build that. So it's got the ability to, integrate, with our tool stack and use our tools. And then obviously the one that's really powerful is running those investigations for you, right? So taking that engineering approach of, looking at data based on the response, knowing where to go and look next to go and find those root causes of the problems. It's really powerful at that. We spoke to the team that built this and said, why does this work so well? And they said, I don't know, but it does, right? But we've had time to kind of reflect on it, right? Because we've been really impressed. We've been able to deliver this product very quickly, because we're just using kind of off-the-shelf models. We haven't had to go and do our own training or build custom models. We're like, why are we able to do this? Why haven't our competitors been successful in this? And so one of the realizations we had is like, this is again the power of open source. We have such a vibrant open source community and ecosystem where people write about what we do. People do podcasts that talk about our technology, right? And so there's all this content that exists on the web about how to use our tools. How's the best way to monitor things using Grafana? What are the best practices for your observability practices and your SRE practices? And this is what the models are trained on. So out of the box, they know our technology, they know how to use it, they know what we're for, and
There
so
is enough
it works.
data out there for the LLM systems to get automatically trained on, so you don't have to actually train the models on your specifics.
Yeah.
How does a dashboard behave? What's the API and all that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an exciting place to be in, right? And again, our code is open source, right? So they know the intricacies of what we're doing. And so we have this huge kind of competitive advantage where we can now focus on delivering more value and building these tools and these better experiences inside, and not having to worry about building models, which is very expensive, and both from a engineering resource as well from a cost basis, right? So we're really excited where this is going to evolve and take us, and the ways that we can better integrate this into the product, right? When we think about how our engineers engage with Grafana, historically it was like, oh, I'll just build a dashboard and I'll put it on a monitor and everyone will look at it, whereas now it's that tool you use every day to understand your applications and your infrastructure. But then the next step is instead of engineers having to go and explore, right, we can leverage the generative AI to do that exploration and just come and tell us what we need to know, right? A great example is when an incident happens, you might get your slow burn, SLO alert will fire. Your on-call engineer will say, okay, there's an incident, and they'll declare an incident. By the time they log into Grafana to look at it, there'll be a summary of all investigation that's already happened and what they think, what the AI thinks is where the root cause is, right?
Yeah.
Ideally, it's going to be right. We know that's not always going to be true, but it's certainly going to, really accelerate, what engineers are able to achieve and how quickly they can go and get things done.
That definitely makes sense. I think this is one thing where even Mercari as an organization is heading towards. We have got an AI native approach to everything that we are trying to solve. And one of the things that you just mentioned, AI becoming the first responder to incidents or alerts, is something that we are also targeting at. And it's great to see that players like you are making progress on it. And I'm hoping that it becomes open source at some time as well. This is definitely going to change a lot of things that developers work on and how they react to things. One thing that is still I'm curious on how observability will have it, because these assistants will only be able to cater and do the things on the data that's there on the observability system. But for example, I could have a different observability system, but I could have a different incident management system, or I could have different runbook system for that example. How do you think everything will kind of connect to it, or
Yeah.
do you have any ideas to it?
Yes, I mean, definitely with our, Grafana Assistant, you mentioned, like when will it be open source? It's a great question, but, one of the things we like to do at Grafana Labs is, we're very comfortable with building competing products at the same time.
Okay.
So we have the Grafana Assistant, the tightly integrated kind of assistant, but we also have our MCP server, right? Which gives you very similar kind of capabilities, where you can connect it to be able to go and build dashboards or to run investigations for you. It's just not as tightly integrated. And so I think this, environment, where you've got different data in different systems, right? Different tools that you use to solve problems. I think that's where that MCP model comes about. It's still very early on, but we're seeing that is the kind of where the industry is moving towards. And so I think that's where we're going to have this capability of, why can't you just connect, other data sources in the same way that we do this in Grafana to be able to visualize data from different databases
Integrations.
and different integrations. Why can't we just go and connect to other MCP servers and expose that data, and so that you can, have that experience, right? Maybe you're in an environment where when there's an incident, you want to go and connect into ServiceNow or something and declare it there. Or maybe there's, as you said, you've got your runbook stored in, a wiki somewhere that you want to go and pull those out, right? And so being able to kind of connect all these things, I think that's certainly the model that the industry is moving towards. So there's this, again, an agentic model. That will be something we will certainly, work to try, because that just fits with the Grafana model, right?
Makes sense.
Of focusing on integration and interoperability. I think it's good for the users, right? And we have a firm belief that if we're doing what's good for the users, it's long term, that's what's good for us.
Got it. So I think with the agentic approach, I think one thing that's getting a lot of buzz around right now is the A2A models, the agent to agent protocols, and the models coming up on top of MCP. What's your take to that?
Look, I'm just excited with how quickly everything's evolving. It's hard, it's hard to say what's going to be the winning approach and technology, because it is moving so quickly. But I think what we're seeing is, we're moving into especially in the observability space, we're moving into the phase now where there's actually general utility, right? Like it is actually helping our engineers. We have an internal kind of approach of how we build product where, we're very fortunate. We're software engineers building software for software engineers. So, we use it ourselves. We're solving our own problems. And so we have a kind of approach where, we know if we've got kind of a good product market fit. If
You have
our,
beta testers inside your company
if our
itself.
engineers just adopt it, right? We don't tell them to. We just see if they do.
Yeah.
We had this experience with our on-call software where our team just migrated off the existing solution we had and onto our own internal one. We never told them to do it. They just did it because they realized it was actually better and it solved their problems. And we've seen the same with our AI, our Grafana Assistant, where teams are now actually using it during incidents that we have to help them troubleshoot and solve the problems much faster. So I think there's general utility. We've moved past the phase where it was just all hype, right? It was a lot of it demos well, but does it actually work? We're now in the phase where there's good utility and our engineers are using it. So I'm very excited for where the future is going. Yeah.
That's superb. And thanks a lot for all these great insights. Just the last few bits, what suggestions that you will like to give to engineers coming in the observability space, software engineering, or tackling around, and what do you think where observability is headed in the next, I would have said 5 to 10 years, but things like changing like anything these days. So what do you think about it changing in 1 or 2 odd years down the line?
Definitely my, recommendations, right, is, if you're not happy with your observability practices, move them forward, right? Iterate and move forward. But at the same time, don't try and bite off too much too quickly, right? This is a journey, right? You don't have to go from 0 to 100 straight away. You want to kind of get that incremental progress over time, right? Similar to how we build software, right? Like we want to have continual iteration and improvement over time and go on that journey. one of the big things we see to the success of that is the adoption of OpenTelemetry. I think that's a big important thing, and I think that's going to be the growing trend. We're already seeing this. What we've seen from our observability survey. What I just see. Talking to the community and users and customers that we have is OpenTelemetry is a big part of most people's observability strategy. That's definitely where the future is going. It opens up just a lot of flexibility and future capabilities that I think are exciting. Other than that, it's really just focus on best practices. A big part of the success of an observability strategy is not actually the tooling; it's actually culture, right? So it's really talking to your team, evangelizing about how to do things better, right? That you don't have to accept the status quo. Are there ways that we can improve our processes and the way we go about things? Because the culture is really the most important thing that will lead to the success or failure of your journey on observability. And I think that's the most important thing.
That's certainly a great point. The culture will drive everything. There are a lot of tools. There are open source tools. There are SaaS providers. There are new startups coming up in the industry as well. That's superb talking to you, Anthony. And I learned a lot in the last duration of for 30-40 minutes, and it's superb to see that how the overall trend is going on, how the industry is evolving, and how it has evolved from the scenes of 5 years back when we see ganglia and graphite combination
Yeah.
to actually going to unified vision and observability. So it was pleasure talking to you. Thanks a lot for taking our time in your busy schedule. I know it's a super busy week for you. So thanks a lot for taking our time for us and talking to our viewers. It's superb, and uh, hopefully we'll see you soon sometime again in some other podcast.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a pleasure having a conversation with you. I'm glad that you learned something because there's value there, and I hope the audience also learns a lot from this as well. But it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot. For all the viewers that are watching the episode, I hope that you have got some great insights. We will work a lot in getting more such insightful content from leaders like Anthony. Like, share, and subscribe our channel, Mercari Tech Keys, and stay tuned for more such content.